Hey, everybody. Can y'all hear me pretty well? Okay, thanks. I'm Olivia. It's lovely to have you all here. And I am an independent educator and consultant. I teach business skills to farmers and ranchers. And I am the program coordinator and curator for the Meat to Market program launching at the conference. So this is in partnership between IAC and the Southwest Grass-Fed Livestock Alliance, which is a small organization based out of New Mexico. And we have been working to develop this program for the last 2 years. We started with a pretty extensive needs assessment and discovery phase, asking folks all across Indian country what they wanted to learn about how to bring their meat to market. So livestock producers are the goal and target audience for our program, and teaching skills and practical know-how and peer learning to convert their operations or better their operations to direct meat sales. So I'm really excited to be here this week, and we have 3 workshops that are kicking off the Meat to Market program. One was this morning, this is our second one, and tomorrow morning we have a butchery demo that we're pretty stoked to see you all at. So today, one more thing, we have some resources in the corner. We have a sheet with a lot of different links and all of our contact information. There's also a sign-up sheet if you're interested in receiving information about the Meat to Market program. Please put your name down there. We are starting webinars in January, and they will unfold throughout the course of all next year to the tune of roughly 2 per month. So 3 here this week, and then all next year. It's a curriculum of almost 30 courses that touch all aspects of business operations. So this is just a little snippet. And there's some information about SWGLA in the corner as well. So be sure to sign up as if you want to receive a digital copy of this presentation. We can send it out as well. So before I have our panelists introduce themselves. I just wanted to give a little bit of the focus of what what today is about. And thinking about which courses from Meat to Market we wanted to bring to the conference, it felt most important to actually have one that discussed our relationship to land here and expressly deals with that relationship. So we have 3 native land specialists, I'll call you guys, uniquely diverse in their experience, and 3 producers, active producers. And they're going to speak to the logistical, jurisdictional, experiential realities of finding and managing land for livestock productions. And, we feel like even though our course is about nuts and bolts, business practices, we can't really get into that without addressing the land, right? And how we're obtaining rights to farm and ranch on it, and how we formulate our perspectives in stewarding that land. So the concepts that we're talking about today are not exclusively for meat producers, but our Meat to Market program is geared towards native producers selling meat. Today is a little bit more universal for sure, and they'll be, I think, applying to everybody in livestock operations. So with that, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your experience, where you are geographically, and we'll start with you, Jim.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Wabintado. I'm a program officer with the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. I've been at ILTF for almost 9 years now, and it has been one of the best jobs that I think that I've ever had. Throughout my career, I've worked in community and economic issues, especially for Indian country. I am an enrolled member, a citizen of the Little River Band of Ottawa Indians. At ILTF, I have responsibility to go out on behalf of the organization and do presentations like this. The Indian Land Tenure Foundation is a nonprofit based in Minnesota. Our mission is to help restore to Indian ownership and management all lands within the original treaty reservation boundaries. To do that, I would suggest that about 2/3 of our energy and resource are put into education and outreach to help tribal communities, ag producers, and Indian landowners better understand what their rights and opportunities look like, Another quarter of our energy and resources goes into legal reform. So as we work with communities and talk about these issues, it allows us to hear what's wrong and work on avenues that we can pursue to improve that for you. I look forward to sharing with you a little bit this afternoon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Delane Atcitty. I'm from Tuba City, Arizona originally, but I live in Taos, New Mexico right now. My background, undergrad in ag business from Oklahoma Panhandle State, and graduate from Texas A&M Kingsville King Ranch Institute. And a lot of my experience is working with ranches from Arizona, New Mexico, and South Texas, and also Oklahoma and Kansas, where I end up coming back to New Mexico managing land for Jicarilla tribes, and also BLM land, custom grazing lands for also the Nature Conservancy. And they have me on several boards, Society for Range Management, National Grazing Lands Coalition, Holistic Management International, Enrich Ag, and and I'm also the director of Indian Nations Conservation Alliance. And then we're starting a beef business with Arrowhead Meats. So we could chat about that later.
Good afternoon, everybody. Homodakepe chande washtena pe chuzaplo. Khashunki tampe emachapi na washichu chajet mitkhawaki chance Weston emachapelo. Na oglala la kota wichasha hemachalo. Good afternoon. My name is Chance Weston. I'm a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. Reside in South Dakota. Work for a nonprofit called Thunder Valley CDC. My background consists of primarily regenerative agriculture experience over the last 10 years in various forms and fashion. I worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs as a realty specialist for many years. In addition to that, my work now consists of the facilitation and development of producers in our community, whether that be small scale poultry systems or large scale bison or cattle grazing operations, and all the monitoring and compliance that goes along with that. So very happy to be here.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is too bright for me. But Giat Shea Dorothea Litson Yinishia. I don't know Sanji Kininch Nanesh Ejetachini Bashin Kia Ani Edashichedo Tutsoni Edashinale. But a Suninch, and I am a Dene woman. I'm from Saley, Wheatfields, Arizona, and that's where I grew up. And my background is in K-12 education. That's my background. But I am a rancher and a farmer. I would consider myself a lifetime rancher and a farmer. I was raised on a farm and a ranch all my life, and we have a little small operations called Litson grass-fed beef operation. So that's what we do, and so I just want to say thank you for the opportunity.
Yate, I'm Benita Litson, same clan as her, Sanjikin and Shlont Kachidi, Bashichin, Kiani, Dashichedo, Totani, Dashanale, also from Saley. And same, we've been ranching all of our lives. And I think as we transition to adulthood, it's a different role as you start to plan on your own with your children and figuring out how they play a role in your ranch. So definitely something that we, pride ourselves in. And my background in education is agribusiness and pre-veterinary science and also natural resource management from Arizona State University. So taking that education, bringing it home and trying to implement that on the ranch and being able to really work with what we have, which is little.
Okini Stuni Donakot Swainiki. Hi, my name is Kristen Kipp. I come from the Blackfeet Nation in northwestern Montana. I'm a cattle rancher. I'm a single mom to 3. Super excited to be here. So thank you. I got my start Actually, my background is not even in agriculture. I grew up on a ranch, but my background, I worked with high-risk youth, addictions counseling, psychology, and I changed my career and everything about 5 years ago. And I got my start with advocacy as part of the Blackfeet Nation Stock Growers Association because we desperately needed a voice. And I've kind of worked through some different projects and collaboration, and now I'm with Piconey Lodge Health Institute, and I work a lot with farmers and ranchers, trying to help with USDA programs and lots of other things, anything that really helps agriculture where we're at. And the reason I'm so passionate and excited is because there's so much potential with agriculture being our largest economy and the driving force behind so many different things in our communities.
Thanks, y'all. We're going to start with Jim.
Presentation. Thank you. I always find it interesting talking at the IAC conference and going out. In a lot of ways, I always considered myself a city Indian. And to this day, I think the only time I've really been around a horse has been at Zach Ducheneau's ranch. And so today, as I talk and share with you some of the information we have on Indian land, I'll trust the ranchers down here to correct anything that needs to be taken care of. But I do work with Indian land issues and have for quite a while. One of the most important things in doing my job is making sure everyone starts with the same set of understanding or language in describing issues. As a very concrete example, when I talk about land use, it's very different. In this context, when talking with an audience like this, land use are going to be things like rotating your livestock, getting your hands into the soil and dealing with soil health or moisture content. But in my world, land use is much more closely related to the legal environment that controls who can do what and how they do that process. So today, my portion of this conversation is to share a little bit about tribal realty basics so that we're starting from the same set of concepts. Most importantly, to start with the different land types that exist within Indian country. There is fee land around our reservations, and that fee land is under the jurisdiction of the state. Most people will pay taxes on their fee land. And one of the great benefits, of course, is that there are no other government agencies involved. So once you hold title to that land and fee, you can exercise the entire bundle of rights. There's about 7 different things, mostly which include possession and control and disposition of those lands. Again, uninterrupted. Restricted fee is very similar to trust land. Restricted fee lands exists in about 2 or 3 major places in the United States, especially Oklahoma. And the biggest difference is that the land has restrictions on what can be done with it, but those restrictions put the land mostly under state systems for approval and or processing. So if you were to do a lease transaction, you would register it with the county court. On the flip side, trust land is mostly what we're going to talk about today, because trust land exists for throughout all of our tribal communities, and trust land is U.S. government land, similar to the restricted fee. Now, with tribal trust or trust properties, I want to highlight there are 3 legal definitions and 1 other at the end that I'll cover. And in talking about trust land, it's important to understand that the United States federal government has the actual title to that land. Like I said, with fee land, I could go to the county courthouse and put it in Jim Wabintado's name. In this case, that name attached to the piece of paper is the United States federal government. And that is what gives them that authority to get involved with all of our transactions. As a trustee of that land, they have the ability currently to be involved with whether or not land gets leased. They have the ability under that trust relationship to determine who is going to inherit the land. And that's important differentiation and a piece to remember. Where I can tell you the title holder became important. We'll actually cover that in a couple more slides, but so let me keep going. Individual, I say reservation, that's what 99% of folks are going to have when it comes to allotted lands as individual trust. But there is a second kind, and this exists in probably about 15 to 18 different states, the individual public domain allotments. And what's important to understand with public domain allotments is that there is not a specific tribe with civil jurisdiction over that land. It may be near a reservation, but that tribal government doesn't have exclusive rights to dictate through its sovereign authority what happens on those public domain allotments. Sometimes, for instance, in Oregon, through the land buyback program, or through the American Indian Probate Reform Act, those lands may go to the tribe, but by original authority, they are not part of that reservation community. In Minnesota, for instance, a number of public domain allotments are actually part of 5 or 6 different tribes who might have a stake in what happens, but again, there's no, and I say civil jurisdiction, which is the laws that take over what goes on those lands. In meeting with tribal community members and ag producers in 2019, it was important to add assignments to this. Assignments are contracts, or sometimes not even under contract, to individuals and their families. But over time, it begins to feel like this is, my family's allotment. We've been farming there for the last 65 years, but ultimately the land is still an assignment, and it's tribal land. The tribe, in theory, could take that assignment and give it to another family or to another individual. And so there are 4 different ways to look at trust land. Personal property, real property, and APRA. This is kind of what I was alluding to with the title issue. So under common law, under general property throughout the world, realty is a term that we use inside the business to talk about the land and everything attached to the land. And like I said, 90% of the world, that is the case. But in Indian country, Congress used its plenary authority, their authority to dictate what happens to Indian country, and change the rules. And this is important as ag producers, because what it states is that covered permanent improvements are not trust assets, and therefore your fence line, the barn that goes with your property, the house that's on the property, anything that is considered a permanent structure is not a trust asset. So it actually has a separate legal title chain right now from the land that it sits on. And again, if you'll recall, what I just said is everywhere else that's not the case. In Indian country, that is important when you're looking at estate planning or when you're doing business transaction, is that you have a personal property interest, just like your car, to a house that's on trust land, and including your own individual allotment. Now, you'll have a lease most of the time if you're on tribal lands, and that'll clear things up a little bit, but it is a significant issue. The reason that exists is the federal government has title to the land, their name is on the title, and going back into the early 2000s and late 90s, 1990s, there was a tribal community in New Mexico that sued the federal government over this very issue. And what it came down to is the schools they built in our communities, the government buildings, they had lead pipes, they had asbestos insulation, and there were other environmental contaminants within these buildings. And so Congress unilaterally, through a process called technical amendment, quickly changed it and absolved themselves of that legal liability. because the Supreme Court ultimately decided that the tribe was correct in stating, well, if it's titled to the federal government, then the problem is theirs. And so the Indian Land Tenure Foundation is working with Indian country to change that because it's a hassle to deal with. But again, the fence line, the barn, all of that stuff does need to be addressed when you're looking at operating your business. Fractional title and ownership. Looks like I'm missing a slide, but that's okay. I can recover. This kind of shows what an undivided interest looks like. The original Lati got it, and when you go 4, 5, 6 generations, you'll have highly fractional ownership over that land. And the reason I mentioned that that's where this term undivided interest comes from. And in a very real sense, your interest in the land has not been divided, but your ownership share is what has actually been divided. And if we look at, say, the one in the middle where it shows 9 different landowners, for sake of conversation, they each own 1/9 of this. Now, that doesn't mean that of that 160 acres, they have, let me go back to the second generation. I can do the math much faster, sorry. 3 owners, so of 160 acres, they don't each have 51 acres. We talk about it that way, but the proper way to evaluate that is equivalent acres. And it's important when you're looking at fractional ownership that you have a voice. I talk about it as a corporate type of approach just because we're C corporations with their stakeholders, their stockholders. Everyone can have a voice at the table, but some of those voices are louder, they're stronger. The person who might have 50% ownership has a whole lot of say over somebody who only has 5%, but it can't be divided that 50% person has 80 of these acres. They have a 50% voice or ability to influence what's going over the entire 160 acres. And so when we talk about undivided interest, that's the important thing is it's not partitioned, it's not set aside for individuals according to their shares of ownership. That's why we say undivided. And so it's important when we look at that to understand. When I talk about agriculture and the legal framework, there are some major stepping stones along the way. The Long-Term Leasing Act was passed in 1955, and that held sway for a long, long, long time. The regulations that were put in place reflected the authority that the Bureau of Indian Affairs exercised fairly unilaterally without our input. Through a lot of hard work in 1993, the American Indian Agricultural Resource Management Act was passed. And that changed and started pulling some ability of the tribes to have a say what's going on within their communities. Under the ARMA Act, I'll share a few of the major principles. Because of the change in 2001, the leasing regulations were actually updated. And so if you do the math between 51 to 2001, that's 50 years. So for almost 50 years, we were operating under this antiquated system. The Hearth Act was passed in 2012, and it became one of the more forward-thinking approaches to having the tribes put together their own leasing codes for residential purposes primarily, but also including business, commercial, as well as agricultural. For the American Indian Ag Resource Management Act, that is very strong language. The Indian Land Tenure Foundation, along with IAC, the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Institute, and Village Earth have been putting together resources to help people do some of their planning. With that plan in place, it does require actually the Bureau of Indian Affairs to enforce and recognize those tribal laws and regulations. Federal land management, 10 years for maximum leases, as well as 25 if there's substantial investments. Rent adjustments every 5 years. So this is where in your activities you may have seen these, and that is the statutory authority that put that stuff in place. Simple majority, legally adopted best interest and market rate. So it starts to modernize the structures and the rules that the Bureau of Indian Affairs follows to reflect our modern tribal communities and agriculture. Part 162, which is a code of federal regulations. And I'll backtrack a little bit just to state that when you get frustrated with what's going on in your operation, the regulations are what you're going to have to follow. But if you disagree with those regulations, go back to the law. The U.S. Code is actually what the Bureau of Indian Affairs has to follow. The regulations are a particular administration's interpretation of what that law means. And so it can be changed. And sometimes that's going to be the easiest way to, for Indian country to change the rules so that they work for us. I think one of the big changes with Part B is all leases must be recorded. So even if you put together your own lease with your cousins, if you negotiate a lease with, a friend, that still has to be recorded, even though the Bureau of Indian Affairs was not part of that process. Even though you may have not worked with the tribe to put that in place, it still does need to be recorded. I would also highlight that Part 162, Subpart B authorizes emergency action and gives you the ability to force the Bureau of Indian Affairs to look at issues of trespass or overgrazing. I know it's pretty common that folks who are non-Indian will get their livestock onto land before its actual season, and that devastates the rest of your grazing process. Oh, I see what they did here. So that's kind of what I have to say. I appreciate getting a chance to talk to you a little bit about Indian land. And as we go in, I know these guys have got some great things to share.
Okay. Well, I got to stand up. It's kind of uncomfortable sitting here. Well, I did have some notes, but it's not going to show up, and we'll just have to wing it, so to speak. But I was asked to talk about different leasing options and how you can be more resourceful with your resources. So we'll start off with leveraging your resources, and then we'll talk about scaling your land base, adjusting your focus, and developing a strategy. Okay, leveraging your resources. As you know, there's tribal members have access to land, and you can easily come into an agreement with people that actually own the land currently and make agreements with them to lease their land to run cattle or sheep or whatever. And that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. That's what I did in the past. And usually a lot of these tribal members, some of them are removed from agriculture, so it's easy to have them agree with it because you're going to fix fences or you're going to clear some brush or develop some of their water resources. So that's the low-hanging fruit that's available to tribal members, is to talk to other tribal members about leasing their land and other family members. And then the other option is a tribal enterprise lease. So they have me on the board of NAPI, Navajo Agricultural Product Industry. It's a 110,000 acre tribal farm, and we have close to 700 pivots. So when I got on the board about 4 years ago, I really wanted to push for a custom grazing program to where we bring tribal cattle, individual rancher cattle, onto NAPI and let them graze the pivot, the circles, the remnants of whatever production was in that field. Or now there's an option to custom grow some grass there in order to finish cattle, maybe have a grass finished product. But that's available. And some like that's like $1.50 a day per head. And when you pencil it out, it might be cheaper than actually purchasing hay. and getting in the vicious cycle of, feeding hay throughout the year instead of, focusing on your own grazing management. And I think that's a huge opportunity. And, at NAPI, we operate at a large scale, so that gives us an economy of scale to work with. But I can foresee in the future, if we get enough tribal cattle on that resource, that we can market, truckfuls of cattle out of there, and we can ask for, certain prices for the cattle. At that point, you don't have to be a price taker. You can actually, put out what you want to get for your cattle. And that's where, to know your break even and all that's important. But that's a option. And then some ranchers use a tribal lease program where they lease tribal ranches and they grow their cattle out there. I was a part of the Peaks Ranch way back when, and at first it was mostly a family operation in Flagstaff, Arizona, and we took care of their cattle out there. And then over the years, it kind of transitioned to more of a Dene Ranchers Association. So they formed somewhat of a co-op or an association to utilize that tribal resource. And with that, they use their leverage to get onto a forestry lease. I think it's over 230,000 acres once they got onto that tribal ranch lease. And I think the last couple of years they've been utilizing that the pivot grazing over at NAPI also. So they're starting to build their own business model that's working for them. And then there's also a non-tribal land lease. To me, that's sometimes a little bit difficult, because you have to agree with most likely a non-native party, and you have to sometimes get lawyers involved, legalities of it, and but that's always an option to go that route and lease land off of the reservation. So the other part of this is, scaling your business. Once you figure out what business model works for you and you want to produce it, reciprocate it, and get it to a larger scale, that's when you could look into scaling your business. And with that, these are several ingredients that you can put into that part of it to scale your business is conservation easements, getting into agreements to lease land, but you're not going to build on it. So you get payments for the conservation easement on top of whatever you get for grazing that land. There's also Forest Service leases. And I wish I had my notes because I had the breakdown of all the different costs and everything. But that's always an option. I know the last number that I had on the top of my head was $1.87 AUM. And then there's also some surcharges. I can't even pull it up on here because of the internet. But anyway, and where I worked at one time was with the Bureau of Land Management, and we leased a lot of those, the acres out. I think in New Mexico, we had oversight of 510,000 acres. And, we leased to private ranchers, but, it's pretty hard to get into those leases. But I know, having managed it in the past, you could easily go into any of these offices and ask for an application and say that you're interested in a federal land lease, and they're obligated to give you those applications. And what I've seen happen is, life happens to everybody, and all these ranchers at one time, they had to get out of at some time in their life, because the grandkids or somebody doesn't want to transition it. Or sometimes you see a death in the family and they get rid of that lease right away. So that's when your application's sitting there and they'll call on you. So it's kind of a long shot, but it's still doable to lease land with the Forest Service and also the BLM. One of the easier ones that I found is state land lease, but they're always in small increments, and they never have, very rarely do they have infrastructure to support those small leases. And usually those are like, anywhere from 5 acres to maybe 80 acres and multiple areas. And it's just a lot of work to maintain some of these state land leases, but I'm sure every state is different. And then there's also seasonal management lease agreements where, you can use your livestock to help another organization achieve their goals. In terms of grazing areas where, say, there's possibility of wildfire issues, and you can use your cattle to graze some of this cheatgrass or some of this other grass that's available in different times of the season, and some of the weed issues. So sometimes they give you dirt cheap leases. Sometimes they don't even charge you to do that. Sometimes you see it along right-of-ways in some of these rural areas where they have sheep on the side of the road and hot wire fence system set up. So that's always an option. And then the last one, there's non-government organization lease. And that's one of them that I'm familiar with because I did at one time work for the Nature Conservancy, where we ran about 2,000 head of cattle and also about, I think it was about 150 head of bison. And that 2,000 head of cattle were 3 cattle owners combined, and we took care of their animals, and we charged them a custom grazing lease. So the organization owned the land, and then we just made money off of the resources, basically, to help pay for our overhead for that ranch, which was it's a pretty neat deal, And then eventually you want to adjust your focus. You're converting forage to money. And this is something that I tell our tribal ranchers is we're literally a tribal nation exporting our resources off the reservation, the cattle. So if you're not making money with your cattle, you're basically giving away your tribe's resource for free. And it's a concept that we need to wrap our head around. And very rarely do ranchers across the board make a profit. I think the statistic is less than 2% of ranchers across the United States make a profit. So you have to develop your own business model as you move forward. And then also consider what you're growing. These feral and wild horses, you might not think of it that way, but you're getting 15 cents a pound for those horses, and they're eating the same resource. And a cow, you're getting $1.60 a pound, $1.80 a pound. Bison, you're getting $5.15, $5.40 a pound. And, sheep, I think you're somewhere like at $12 a pound. So, kind of have an idea of what you're trading the resource for and what you're actually giving up when you do overgraze it. And then that goes into your cow costs. What I see is a lot of ranchers upside down with their cow costs. It takes them approximately $1,800 in some places to run a cow all year. And that includes their water hauling, their buying hay, even their labor, wear and tear on their vehicles. So they're pushing $2,000, but they're getting $800 to $1,000 for that calf. So they're upside down $1,000 basically, which is putting your family in a hole. So all this needs to be considered when you're thinking about these leases and how you can scale your business. Partnerships have been really good for us. I wish I had my notes because it was all on there. The partnerships that we use is, we started working with the Nature Conservancy on large scales to do a virtual fence project, and we're going to start this in March with Jemez Pueblo, where we're going to collar their cattle on 40,000 acres. And so these partnerships are very beneficial. Even partnerships with some of these native organizations can really, they achieve their goals by outreach and deliverables, and you can also utilize some of that access to their resources. So it's really beneficial that you reach out. Even some of these organizations that that are out there. We started that Indigenous Grazing Lands Coalition months back, and that's starting to build momentum. And, we're hoping to have more resources available in the future. Use of technology, like I just mentioned, that virtual fencing, drones. There's all kinds of technology that's available that we can utilize to graze areas that we never had access to before, and to utilize the land a lot better. Because usually every year we hit the same pastures over and over, and it's nice to give them a rest, defer that grazing for a few months, or if not the whole year. And that can tie back into some habitat issues for animals, and that's where these partnerships tie back into. Utilizing these partnerships to grow habitat, they'll be willing to contribute. Another one that we're starting up is a partnership with the Fish and Wildlife, United States Fish and Wildlife with the White River Tribe, where we're going to help them enclose some of their spring areas and limit access to cattle so they'll graze other places. And then we also started a partnership with Defenders of Wildlife, where they have wolves out there, but now they're willing to help offset some of the ranchers' costs of labor by employing a range rider. So that will be beneficial too. And then ultimately marketing. We're leaving a lot on the table by not utilizing our marketing or telling our story about where this meat has come from. When I'm out there with our cows, I was like, if they could just see what I'm seeing, this pristine water, this nice grass, and it's getting converted, and then I end up taking them to the auction because I don't have an economy of scale. But there's a lot of opportunities with marketing. And then also, developing a strategy. You got to build your own tribal livestock business model, no matter what enterprise you're in. A lot of times we follow the ag channel. I forgot what it's called. And we see their big tractors and trailers and trucks, and we're like, yeah, that's ranching. But, that's not working for us. We got to develop our own, what works for us. A lot of the non-native ranchers, their land is appreciating where ours don't. Rural area land in some areas appreciates at 7% a year. And ours is not. We're not in that situation where we can gain on that appreciation. I'm sure there's places that are, but for the most part, we can't do that land appreciation and capture that. So, like when I was down at the King Ranch, I think over 50% of their income was oil and gas, and then 30% was hunting, and then 20% was cattle. And they were capturing every which way they could resources and paying it all, paying for the ranch, paying for the overhead. So that's what we really need to focus on, is having a business model that works for us. For years, we grew cattle, and we took it to the border towns, and we let somebody buy it there. And in some instances, the buyers go back and they lease our tribal resources, and they put weight on these cattle or whatever, and then they sell it over again. And we heard conversations where they're bragging about that's the most money they ever made, was buying native cattle and using native resources to grow it. So every tribe has their own resources, and we got to figure out what's the best business model to utilize those resources. And I think the key to that is the tribes working together, because every one of these tribes own a piece of the puzzle. We got to figure out how they fit together. I know there's some tribes that are in southern Arizona and even western Arizona where they have large farms that could carry cattle through the winter without a whole lot of feed input, and that possibly, that we could do that at Nappy if we start to drill for water instead of relying on the canal system. Because once the canal system shuts off, 70 miles of canals on Nappy, once that's shut off, then we had to wait for it to reopen in April of every year. So we lose a lot of opportunity costs by not keeping that open. Also having land management goals. What is your return on your investment? Outside, when I had a chance to work for a huge feedlot. It was 110,000. It was called Pokey Feeders in Scott City, Kansas, and I managed their stockers. And they just purchased the ranch, but every day you would get calls on, how many animals do we have sick? How many deaths do we have? At the end, we figured out, how much money are we making per acre? That's what it comes down to. How much money? So, I challenge all of us here that are producers to think about that. How much are you making per acre? If you're not making money, then it's zeroing out and you're using that resource and depleting it for nothing. So that's something to think about moving forward. And then using your economy of scale. There's a lot of tribal ranches, tribal farms. We could have a bigger food product if we ever put our mind to it. And that would solve a lot of our food security and food sovereignty issues. We learned firsthand through COVID that we weren't as sovereign as we thought we were. We were in line to get food from the state and from the feds. And you would think that, we'd be in a bigger, stronger position by now, but we're not. So we have a lot of lessons that we learned from that and be prepared for the next generation. My grandma's 104, and she lived through the Spanish flu, and now she lived through COVID. So it is going to happen again. It might even happen more frequently than we think, not 100 plus years, so we got to be prepared. One business model that I like to look at is the Ag Reserves Incorporated, the Mormon ranches. They provide for their own church members, and they're vertically integrated. They're buying strategically throughout the United States, ranches, feed yards, dairies, pig farms, and they're doing it strategically. They have hurdle rates that they have to think about when they do land purchases. And they even look at statistics of how metro land grows. The more profitable investment is always to the northeast of most big cities. When you go northeast, that's where the money flows. So they purchase land intentionally in those areas. So that's an investment. That's how they think about it, as an investment in the land, because that's going to appreciate. But for the time being, they're going to stick cattle on it and make money with the cattle too. And, our thinking is just making money with cattle. And these guys are they're thinkers. So that's what I meant by having land management goals. And now the opportunity is regenerative grazing, regenerative ag practices. That's the buzzword, soil health. At Nappy, we have consultants working with us to do regenerative ag practices and eventually market our products as regenerative ag produced. And we're really focusing on soil health, because when you have a farm like that that's 50 years old, you really beat the soil doing it commercially. So we're trying to go back to that. And then hopefully we can get some soil health oriented customers and climate adaptation needs. So I guess the take home for this presentation is it's not the lack that we lack resources. We have resources. We just what we do is we lack resourcefulness. And maybe it's not scaling. Maybe it's taking care of what you have and taking care of your soil, adjusting your stocking rates. Maybe that's what we need to focus on for now, and marketing our cattle better, or whatever product we have better, instead of trying to get out there and get really active leasing. So, thank you.
So to follow with what Jim and Delane had said, when we're looking into the realty realm, I just wanted to highlight a couple bullet points. I guess when we're building off a couple things. One big thing you're really going to want to look at when you go to your local BIA office, or if your tribe has assumed that role by now, is looking at the lease consent requirements. When you're looking at a new piece of land that you might be trying to lease or get after, that's really going to help you define how many owners you have to talk to and what percentage of them you actually have to get their authorization for. The BIA has a scale for that, which can be helpful, which can narrow things down. I didn't get to put a slide on there for that, but that is definitely a resource that every office has. The other thing is that we're going to look at is the farm pasture leases, which the BIA does administer, can really spell out and define a lot of your goals. You heard Delane talk about a lot of the regenerative ag practices. Those can actually be stipulations that can be put into your farm pasture. So that way they can be defined, that way they can be followed through on, and that way they can be tracked. The other portion of it that you're really going to want to look at is that I can't hammer the farm pasture lease enough, just because that's a primary function of a lot of realty offices, whether it's tribal or BIA. That's kind of their bread and butter that they work with. And there are a lot of times they're a lot more attainable. A lot of times you have younger up and coming producers who are saying, I'm trying to get into a range unit or trying to get into these bigger units, but they're usually tied up by the bigger producers. So how can we start to really bring those people of that younger generation, start to foster that? They're really going to want to start with the farm pasture leases. The attainability of those is a lot higher, especially for your up and coming producers. One thing that we really need to look at also when we hit on the regenerative grazing practices, a lot of times you'll find whether it's rotational grazing or whether it's whatever practice that you can usually find today is usually going to exceed a lot of the BIA stipulations. Because right now, even let's say we're talking about range units, a lot of the range unit data that we get from year to year is 5-year-old data, and it's collected by range surveys. And so if you're managing correctly in a regenerative manner, your data is going to be more dynamic and it's not going to be so static. So really taking a hard look at when you start to really implement some of these practices, I think is going to be important for a lot of people who are going to be taking advantage of the lease situation. For example, I think this can't be more paramount, but I always like to give this example is that, for example, in Pine Ridge, where I'm from, we roughly have around 2.1 million acres, but 1.1 million of those are in agricultural leases. Out of that 1.1 million acres, we're roughly raising around 27,000 AU or animal units, even if you're counting for loss and so on and so forth. That's like 19 million pounds, a very conservative estimate. 19 million pounds that's raised on a reservation and exported, to Delane's point, that we're continually exporting our resources. And I'm sure it's similar from reservation to reservation, that you'll find those similar statistics. The USDA usually has a really good figure that they put forward concerning the year 2050, that by the year 2050, and as Earth approaches 10 billion people, we're really going to need to increase our food production capacity by 70%. So if you're thinking about the resources that exist from reservation to reservation, we really need to take advantage of those and develop those, because it couldn't be more paramount in this generation, especially when we're talking about climate resiliency. How can we make our operations from year to year more profitable? Delane also mentioned how 2% of the operators throughout the world, 2% are operating at a deficit. And so 2% are profitable. That's what I was going to say. 2% are profitable. So you look at the other 98% of the operators that are out there when they're in this situation, by incorporating more regenerative practices and more rotational grazing, you can take that. Most operations, conventional operations, are continually year to year operating at a 3 to 5% loss. So, I mean, when you start to incorporate more grazing practices, you can take that to a 1 to 2% gain. So if you're talking on a large scale operation, that's a big impact, and not just the impact to the pocketbook, but also to the environment that we're in. So I just wanted to hit on a couple of those. Efficient.
Like I said, for us, my name is Dorothea Litson, and we run a little small grass-fed beef operation. And we're we're the fourth generation ranchers and farmers within our little small operation. And we're located in Saley wheat fields. It's about, I would say, if you look at the map, Canyon de Chelly, you're looking at the head of Canyon de Chelly where wheat fields and Saley is located. That's where we're located on the map. We're about 7,000 in elevation. That's our location. And one of the biggest things that we really involve our youth, our very own children, to make sure that they're aware of the land, they're aware of the operations. It gives them a sense of identity to make sure where they come from, and it gives them a sense of direction of where they're going to head to. So that's really a big portion of our operation. And one of the biggest things I would say, how, like I said, we've been ranchers all our lives. We grew up ranching and farming. And I think one of the biggest takeaway that really bring it home for us is, I always remember my paternal grandfather standing to us saying that, he was dying of cancer. And he says, "You did everything you could for me. You had a lot of love." And he always told us, one of the things I established for you is this land, and it's here. I don't want you to think that I'm gone. This is going to be your father. This is going to be your grandfather. And if you take care of it, it's going to take care of you. So that's one of the biggest things that we always pride in, and that we took that to heart and tried to make something better of our land. And we don't really look at it as it's a government land. I think that's the mindset you have to go into and say, this is our land, and how you're going to take care of it in the long run. So of course you have, on the Navajo Nation, you have multiple, we have 3 states, the state of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, and they're all different. The structure is all different. The landscape is all different. There's open range, there's customary use, there's range management, and there's allottees land in the area. We're fortunate to have on our area customary use, and we have management. I'm always forever grateful for my paternal grandmothers and my paternal grandparents, and to be able to be visionary and to be able to put that establishment for us back in about 50 years ago, to make sure, because they said, we don't know what the future is going to hold for our grandchildren. So I guess this is what they meant, where we're at today. And so I'm so forever grateful for that. And so that's what we have. But there are challenges. But one of the biggest things there are layers of challenges on our reservation. And just like I said, and I think the best way to approach it and going forward is to know that it's yours. And I think that's where your true sovereignty comes into play, how you want that land to be. And there are so much red tapes that you go through, but you manage with what you have. And you have to stand up for yourself. It's not easy. I'm just going to tell you, it's not easy. You have to stand up for yourself. You have to have that goal in mind, just like what these guys were saying. It's like, and so we have this little small operation. And so the layers of bureaucracy that we have to go through just to improve what we have. And it takes we had my father applied for NRCS equip, and the amount of things that we had to go through just to get it done is like, it was ridiculous. And to this day, it's even, I would say it's like 3 times harder. I'll be honest with you. And to apply for another one, it's like, geez, I wonder how much more we could do, just to get through what we could apply for more. And that's where it's at. But we continue to practice what we have. And just like I said, there's the range management piece that we have. There's open range, and there's allotted land, and there's customary use. Those are the 4 major structures that we have on the Navajo Nation. And so I'm going to turn it over to my sister.
Thank you. So some of the challenges for utilizing multiple land descriptions. So our ranch, we have, as she mentioned, customary use land, range management units, and also open range grazing. Now, how do you put that all into your management plan? And it's very, I want to say, difficult and easy at the same time. Learning how to listen to the land and being able to have a flexible management plan to be able to maneuver around those land conditions that we do have. So as she mentioned, we're fortunate to have grazing in both customary on my paternal side of the family. On our maternal, they have range management units. And then we have what we call seasonal grazing, which is moving cattle to higher country in the summertime. See if I can get this. So here's a picture on the far top is, our winter range, which is customary use. We do get snow. Everyone thinks that we're in Arizona and it's so hot. How can you produce cattle? So we do get majority of our precipitation in this area is snow. And so we have to supplemental feed for sure. So we also have farmland, 45 acres of hayland that we grow on and be able to manipulate that into our grazing program. And then in the spring, we go down clockwise. We start moving our cattle, deciding when we are going to move our cattle to higher country, depending on how much forage is available up there or water, snow melts, and so on. And then we move, and that time, in this later spring or early spring, we decide half of our herd goes to open range, half goes into range management units. And we're able to manipulate these 2 in our grazing program. And sometimes, your range management unit is going to be doing better because it's fenced off. There's a lot more control in how you're going to operate and manage that area. Your open range, you're fighting with neighbors' livestock coming into your area. Your cows might be, getting ready to be bred. So you have to definitely work on how you're going to put your breeding season into this program. And then when we go back into winter, what we do is if we don't have enough monsoon rains, right, and we don't have enough grass, then we have to put them into our hay pastures and hold them there at least another 1 or 2 months in order to bring them back to winter range. So we're able to utilize every little piece of land that we're able to do. We grow our own hay in the summer and we store that for winter supplemental feeding. And that's something we do. It's our other life from our 8 to 5 jobs. And some of the things I think managing are through the barriers that she mentioned is really being persistent, being consistent, understanding your land, being able to collect that data and information. And be able to say that it is yours because you put your sweat, tears, your effort, your children are out there, you're fencing, you're doing all you can, and you want to take care of it and make it more beneficial for that, for that livestock, for your next generation. And just as mentioned, I think Delane kind of hit on it is we may be a small operation, but some of the things that we're really trying to push is, what does grass-fed look like in Indian country? You look across Navajo, you see a lot of overgrazing, and that's something we don't want to do. We want to make sure our land is improved upon. We have enough forage on the ground for our livestock. We're able to, grow quality product when we're going to go to harvest, and try to finish, our cattle out in the fall time. And with, I guess, in later talks, we'll talk a little bit about the business management side, but it all goes hand in hand in regards to making sure you have quality rangeland in order to have a quality product. And of course, generation and generation, I think we're really thinking about the future of our children and our grandchildren and holding on to that. I think that's it.
Hi, my name's Kristen again. So I introduced myself a little bit. I am a producer. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Montana, and kind of went full circle and came back to agriculture. I think there was a little bit on one of the presentations, there was something that really hit home with me, and it was adjust your focus. And in my family, like many families, you do things a certain way, and change doesn't come easy. And I started looking, and I know other people in the community all over, it's kind of been a slow shift of what can we do to be more productive, to get more out of the resources that we have, because it is limited. And so there's certain things that I know I have friends that have changed their operations drastically, down to minor changes. I've shifted my calving date. I've changed my breeding program up. I'm looking at feeding more grass, less hay, different things, because it's really hard to squeeze $1 out of a rock, which is what it feels like we're doing. And on my reservation, we are primarily cattle ranchers, and the demographic is they're working families, so they're often holding outside jobs in addition to raising their family and ranching. We're working class, and I always say, like, well, we have some larger operations, but I don't even say I'm working class. I'm like, I'm working class poor. We work so hard to take care of the land and to contribute to our communities and to raise our families. So I previously did work doing FSA, Farm Service Agency outreach. We have the majority of our producers do not utilize USDA programs, and there are millions and millions of dollars in our community alone that are left on the table. I crunched numbers a little bit when I first came on for, just to give you an idea. We had there's over 200 programs, not including the loan side, and we had like $3.4 million left on the table for one program, LFP, Livestock Forage Program. In 1 month with one employee, this is the value of outreach and having support and having these resources for producers. We were able to help producers access a little over $2 million in 1 month alone. I don't know if that doesn't speak to people. And so I'm always advocating that we need more people to help manage the land. We just need more people all over across the board. But that's kind of where, so I did that. I worked with FSA, and I've switched now. So I am now doing work with our regenerative grazing program. We have a great team. I work for Pickani Lodge Health Institute. We're a Blackfeet founded and led organization on the Blackfeet Nation. We have a variety of programs, but our food and ag department is really groundbreaking. We've done some amazing work. I want to say that we have to be practical also. One of the biggest obstacles in order to do certain practices, you have to have the structure in place. We have a huge need for water development where we're at due to so many things, and it's jumping through those hoops. I experienced drought. My springs dried up in the first 3 weeks of 2021. My application is still at the BIA to simply have to simply just do the what's it called? The assessment, the environmental assessment, not even to do the work. That's been June of 2021. I'm not sure how long that is. That's a really long time. Everything's done. It just needs a signature. But aside from water development, you need to have the fencing. We cannot go and push, okay, you need to do rotational grazing. You need to do high intensity grazing. You need to do this or that. We have to have the structure in place. And so it's the conservation efforts are really great. There's some great ideas. There's practices out there. But in order to get to that point, there's obstacles that we have to overcome. And I'm a little bit of a crybaby, but we live in where we live in the hardest hit area for predators. So we have a huge, a lot of the money that producers are taking home right across the board. We have huge losses. We are in a really cold climate, the wind, the short growing season. Not only in Montana do people in agriculture have it hard all over. Montana is really difficult. On the Blackfeet Nation, for us to produce the same livestock in a different location, we are putting in much more money and labor. It is so hard. And so that's why it's important to be smart with the way that we operate and to have all the resources that we can available. With regenerative grazing, I do want to talk about there's lots of different practices out there, and some of them may not apply to everyone. Some of the things that we have done, so our program's been going for a couple years. We've had producers enrolled, and we're about to do a new enrollment across the board for a 5-year project. One of the big ones, of course, is the high intensity grazing. They're like 3 to 7 day graze periods, which are maybe practical for some people. They might be able to do it. Other people might have a difficult time. The interior fence, like electric fencing to help rotate, and also drought resilient practices. Our drought has been devastating. We've had producers going out of business. The neighbors that live like right next to us on the family ranch went out of business. And so all of these things are so near and dear to my heart because I see people living this every day. But that's the drought resilient practices, like basically capturing and storing that water, whether it's snow fence. My friend, a fellow rancher, she has been able to extend her water usage by 30 days just by using snow fences. And also beaver mimicry, which is often misunderstood, is not the reintroduction of beaver, but it's a way to capture that water and slow down the flow and basically to extend your water use for your livestock. And those are probably the major ones. There's other practices that we do use. Those are the ones that we've used the most. But I just want to encourage, like several people have said, we have to think smart. We have to work together. We have to collaborate and keep thinking of ways how we help ourselves and how we move forward. How we make the best with what we have. And I don't know if there's anything else. I was kind of waiting for Olivia just to grab the mic from me, but just kidding. But thank you all. That's
All right, thanks you all. So we're going to take about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A to this group. And I don't know if there's another mic we can have with the TA walking around. That would be awesome. Thank you. And then after y'all's questions, our meet to market educators from this morning's course on starting your meat operation are going to come in, and we're going to get off the stage and get a little bit more intimate and have an opportunity for some extended questions with these folks and with those folks, and we'll come hang out with y'all down there on the tables. So for now, let's focus on questions for everyone up here. Anybody has any questions?
Any questions?
I guess that means you guys did a really good job here. All right, I want to ask a question about how many folks in the room feel like they have some takeaway information that is new to them today? And how many folks feel like maybe you didn't have any concrete information that was new, but that you had a little piece of inspiration, a little spark that went off, something that made you think of something to do differently? If any of those of you who had some sparks go off feel courageous, I think it would be wonderful to hear what resonated for you and what you might think about doing differently as a result of it. So if you're feeling up to sharing with the group, we would love to hear that. Don't be shy. No one feel like sharing what they're inspired to do? Anybody up here? Okay. All right. All right. Well, if we're good. Oh, you want to share? Great. Go ahead.
Oh, just wanted to say that, thank you all for being here and listening to us. And I think, as ranchers, most of us are, and, we've grown into it, and we have that father and mother figure that has implemented that before. And I always try to encourage my children when times get tough to think how much harder it was, when they were our age, making those decisions in a different time when government was much stricter and being pushed off the land and things like that. And I feel like we're in a time where we have so much opportunity to be able to make agriculture unique for our tribal nations and be able to utilize our lands in a way that would benefit our people long term. When we talk, when Delane talked about food security, we're at that brink where we could be our own suppliers. We could be our own food producers, and we could, we're a huge nation all together, right? And we can be a huge part of the agricultural industry if we all put our minds to it. As cattle producers across Indian country, even bison, there's just so much opportunity, and our food systems are definitely unique. You guys tasted yesterday on the table. That was a really good lunch, right? And to think we could feed people in that way if we could find someone to cohesively bring us all together and our foods together and package that. How awesome would that be? And I think that's where our vision is to be a part of that food on the table. Let's partner together and be able to do that for our children to hopefully, be proud of what they produce and being able to, continue to take care of our lands. One thing I know in our nation that I'm really scared of is, we've overgrazed it so much that permits are being pulled. And our tribes, all of us as tribes, we have first water rights, right? And so and the reason why we have that is because of how we utilize the land and the water. But if we don't use the land and the water anymore, we don't have a say in how to argue for that water right anymore. And so I think that's something to really think about in the future is that, you hear of the dams running low here that, electrifies Las Vegas and all the Western states and cities. But that time's going to come and back to us for that water right issue. And so I feel like, we definitely need to be the next game changer in thinking about the next 20, 40 years and set that stage for our youth and our ability to be able to feed our own people.
Thanks. Yeah. I think Chance wanted to say something, and then Delane, why don't you go?
I guess just one last comment. I just wanted to leave everybody with something to think about, is that 80% of the world's diversity is controlled by, and we just talked about this in DC the other day, it was that 80% of the world's diversity is controlled by 20% of the land base. And that 20% of the land base is controlled by 5% of the population, which is tribes. And so I think when you really think about that and you really grasp that, and something that's being pushed forward, which I'm really appreciative of, is that tribal, whether that's tribes, individual, whomever, tribal land management is conservation, period. So I just want to leave you guys with that thought also.
Yeah, one thing that I'd like to have people think about is, collectively with all the tribes, they own 55 million acres of tribal rangeland throughout the United States. And that's one heck of a tribal ranch when you think about it. It's bigger than your Yellowstone ranches or even your 4-6s or even your King Ranch. There's a huge amount of opportunity, and there's 4 million acres of tribal farmlands. So there's a lot of resources out there. There's even a lot of the tribes that we work with, they're underutilizing their water resources right now. A lot of them are only like at 30% of their whole water rights. So there's some huge opportunities for tribal nations to become, the actual breadbasket for America, and even foreign places also. And when you think about it, that also builds us up in our tribal sovereignty. If that time ever comes, we have the resources to feed ourselves. So, thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Anyone else out there have something they want to add? I think we got one over here.
My name is Eleanor Ortega. I'm a Yachid-Autumn and a Tohono-Autumn. And we have 3 farms on the nation. And you're right, when COVID broke out, we didn't have anything on our farms that would help feed the people on our nation. We're a large nation too. And I guess we've lost what our elders used to do when we used to help feed each other. Like I know that in the village where I'm from, if we killed a cow, we went to every household and gave them a piece of the meat that we had killed. And that was the way we used to do it. But now we've lost that. And when you mentioned about the Mormons, yes, they do that. They watch out for their own people, and they have they can a lot of stuff, and they're really for their children too. And I think we need to go back and really relook at this as Native people, that we need to really start watching out for ourselves, because yes, I'm sure it will happen again. And at our farms, we have nothing like that we would feed our people with, like we have cotton, alfalfa, and all that other stuff. But as far as food goes, we didn't have anything. So thank you for that, sir, when you mentioned that.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything they want to add? Okay, well, we're going to stick around. We're going to come down here. Our other educators are going to come and arrive, and we encourage you all to stick around and have some casual conversation with these folks about anything that you have on your mind. We'll be here until 3:30. And thank you all. And thanks to our panelists for sharing their stories and their perspectives. So just one last little thing also, I wanted you all to know that there is also the Meet to Market page is up on the IAC website under the resources section. So you can watch that site for more information as it comes out, and you can sign up right now for email announcements about how to register for all of our future courses. And thanks for joining us today.